Sorry, I don't love you. A phrase you've grown accustomed to. Cause with you something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be happy.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is Tim Matthews. Today we're talking all about Mission Impossible. Tim, I know with the new movie out, this was something that you hit me up to talk about, and honestly, I think I had not seen this before because I looked on our shelves of DVDs and we only have Mission Impossible 3 for whatever reason. Kind of drives me crazy. I'm like, well, where are 1 and 2 at least, because they're on movie 6 now with Fallout?
It's the 6th one.
Yeah, so I think, this first one, just Mission: Impossible, is one that I had always been familiar with, but I'm not entirely convinced I had seen it in full before after I watched it for this. So thank you for bringing this up because I definitely enjoyed myself. Sometimes all you need is a good action movie that doesn't make you think too terribly much.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I want to start with here is just how well this movie stands up over 2 decades later, because it came out in 1996, if I am remembering correctly. So it's been a long journey to get to 6 movies for this franchise.
Oh, absolutely. Troubled production history as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's a lot longer than Marvel has had to put out 20 movies in half the time. So it's one of those things where it just depends. But luckily, it's something we're still getting today. And, this one, for being done in 1996 and possibly sooner, depending on what their schedule was like, it's one of those movies where, because it's not a ton of CGI necessarily, it doesn't look too horrible when you watch it today. And I feel like one of the older sets of movies that I always feel that way about is the original Star Wars trilogy, because they use so many practical effects. You're like, okay, these are movies that are going to sort of stand the test of time, because you could imagine people making the same movie today in pretty much the same way. Obviously, with Mission Impossible, they've gone bigger with the stunts and the fact that they do have CGI at their disposal, and it looks way better than it did in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. One of the biggest things that Tom Cruise has always pushed with the series, because it all came to be, like, he's always been the producer of them. He was a big fan of the series when he was a kid, and he really, really pushed to make this movie at a time when studios were like, really? That old show from the 60s? Like, I don't know if anyone's going to want to see that. But he just really felt that it would be something really cool and fun to do, and a huge thing that he pushes with all of the movies, even with the new ones, is for practical effects and realism, because he feels that audiences respond better to when they know it's the actual actor, when they know it's not a stuntman, when they know it's not CGI in the background, or that they're just in a studio and not actually hanging on a train. So that was something that it definitely helps all these movies, at least, stunts and effects wise, really hold up. And even the little bit of CGI in this, one of the things that I noticed is, every once in a while, I guess especially like in the train sequence, some of the cracks may show a little bit in the CGI, but even so, I didn't think the CGI it held up better than I thought a movie from 1996 would have.
Right.
And that was something when I was watching, I'm like, oh man, this still looks really good. And I feel like it's like you were saying, it's that old style of movie making with the mix of the practical and the CGI. And when you blend the two together, it doesn't stand out as much, and it feels more real and holds up.
Yeah, and I think that sort of leads us right into just discussing the action sequences throughout this, because you mentioned obviously the biggest action sequence at the end there, but before that, we have a lot of Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt running, he's running from place to place, and
love Tom Cruise running.
yeah, and you can tell that he's someone who isn't afraid to sort of take that next step with doing his own stunts. And most people in Hollywood, I would say, do not do their own stunts just because a lot of it's a safety precaution. We've seen stories even recently about the stunt woman who died in an accident on the Deadpool 2 set, I believe. So, these things do happen, and it is a safety hazard for stars depending on what the sequence is. Obviously, if it's just fight sequences, that's probably less dangerous than things like jumping off of buildings and motorcycle chases, car chases, and everything like that. But with Tom Cruise, you can tell that he puts so much care into these movies. And I was actually listening to a podcast recently with the Fallout director, and he was talking about just how hands-on Tom Cruise has been with this series. So I think to have him being the one doing these action sequences, just sort of like you said, it makes the audience feel it more, because you're like, oh, you can tell when it's not someone else sometimes too, especially in lower budget productions like TV shows and whatnot. If there's a stunt woman or a stunt man in there, sometimes you can tell because the height's slightly off, the build's slightly off, they do the best they can, but sometimes you're like, oop, got that. And with this, you never have that. So with the action sequences, everything is so continuous too. I feel like it doesn't make it seem like they have to cut every 2 seconds to have you not realize that it's a stuntman.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you were saying, the director like telling the stories about like Fallout and everything. When you have an actor who, it also probably helps that he's one of the last like real movie stars, and he's also your producer. It's probably a little easier for them to be like, can he do this stunt? And he kind of just, I guess, needs to turn to himself and be like, yeah, I can do this stunt. And I think there was a motorcycle stunt in the new one, and there was a safety precaution that wasn't working on the day. And the director, Christopher McQuarrie, turns to him and he's like, well, this isn't, it's not functioning properly. What are we going to do? And Tom Cruise apparently just said, well, we got to go. We got to do it. And he just revved up the motorcycle and went. And so it's, to see that all the way to recently in the new movies that he's in his 50s and he's still pushing the envelope to do these great and spectacular things. It was exciting rewatching the first one and seeing almost like the humble beginnings of what was to come. Cause it's, I think we had mentioned before we started, there's an action movie, but there's not a lot of action in it. And, but the action sequences that are in this, they are pretty spectacular.
Yeah. For me, I wouldn't necessarily even consider him, running around when they are following the guy and as an action scene necessarily, because,
No.
there's running in a lot of movies, it's just a thing. You can have, you can be watching Stranger Things and it's like, it's not really an action show, but they're riding their bikes and running around a lot because they're kids.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where when I say action scenes, I mean like that final action scene, or when, he is across the street in the restaurant with the guy and he like whips stuff around and breaks the aquarium and it's just like all this water comes flooding out and that is more along the lines.
And all that was practical. That was a ton of water, and they had to say to him, they're like, all right, we're going to count to 3. And it's like, and you go, and you don't wait, and you don't go before, you don't go after, you go when you're supposed to, because all this water is going to come down. This one is more, this one leans more heavily on the espionage aspect. It leans heavily, I feel, on a very noir style, almost even Hitchcockian, which is not out of the ordinary for Brian De Palma. He's kind of well known for his homages, I should say, to Hitchcock. So that definitely comes through.
Yeah, I love the espionage feel to it too, because, when they're breaking into that fortified room, and he's suspended from the air duct. It's like, okay, you know, it's very suspenseful, but you don't need a ton of action to make the audience feel that way. You're like, oh my goodness, if he drops a single drop of sweat on this thing, the alarms are going to go off. And we see that because he nearly touches it and then he's like catching his own sweat. So
Yeah.
even those things, you know, while they aren't necessarily big action sequences, it's like that is where you really get the audience's attention and you're able to keep their attention up until the big final action sequence. And we definitely need to talk about this one a little more in depth because it is insane. You know, you have him on the train, and then next thing you know, he's literally on the top of the train and he's not able to use those, you know, magnetic grips that the other guy has that he had previously. And it's that moment where it's like, okay, every time he lets go, it's like you stop breathing for a moment, and then he gets to his point and he's able to grab on and stay on the train, and then he nearly falls off, and you're like, okay, this is intense. And when you have, you know, that moment where he's hanging off the side of the train, you're like, okay, we know he makes it because there are a bazillion other movies. Yeah. So, you know, watching this, you don't have quite the same intensity as you would watching it like in theaters or something. But it was still kind of there, even though I was like, okay, well, I know he doesn't die. But then, you know, he's going after Jim, who was his boss and supposedly was dead because he went through this elaborate scheme to fake his own death and everything like that. And the helicopter is coming to get him. And it's one of the guys that it's Krieger, I believe, right?
Yeah, Krieger's flying the helicopter.
Yeah, and so he is basically double crossing Ethan because he had just pulled a job with him and Jim was behind pretty much everything. So you have this intense moment, not only as an action sequence, but emotionally for the characters as well, because you know Ethan isn't going to let it go.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that I think that this movie does so well is right from the start when we have the introduction to the original team and they all get killed off, which is brilliant to do that in the beginning. But I love that in all that small bit of time, we don't need an entire movie's worth of character development with these characters. Like they do the little bits of dialogue, I think does so well, making us feel like all these guys and women, they've been working together. They've done a bunch of these missions together. They have a great camaraderie. Ethan clearly has a really, really close relationship with Jim. And so I feel like that, all those things and the way that it builds so nicely, just even in that short period of time, makes that betrayal work so well later in the film. I've always felt that was really, really impressive. Except for when I first watched it as a kid, because when I first watched it as a kid, I didn't understand like half of this movie,
right?
Especially when all the twists and turns start happening. It wasn't until later that I was like, I get it. And Jim Phelps is actually, as I mentioned, this being based on the old TV series. Jim Phelps is the only character from the TV series. It's a different actor playing him, but he's the only character from the TV series that made it into the film series. And it was actually something that the TV actors did not really appreciate, him being turned into an antagonist. I haven't finished the TV series. I'm only in season 2. I obviously don't have the nostalgia of growing up on the show that fans of it did, but I thought it was I think it kind of makes sense and is a cool plot line that this guy who worked with the IMF all these years and everything, and then after the Cold War kind of almost feels burnt out and doesn't feel like he's been appreciated, and kind of flips. And I think There's a lot of subtle storytelling in this movie that in my repeated viewings that I've caught. And so it's like you have all this exciting action, like the big train sequence and the heist and everything, but riddled all throughout is really impressive storytelling. That I definitely really commend this movie for, and don't think it gets enough credit for.
Plus, all of that storytelling that they're doing in between these big moments doesn't make it feel like they're having action scenes just for the sake of having action scenes, which I feel like a lot of action movies do. They'll be pretty thin on plot, and it's just like, let's just give the audience something fun to look at, pretty much. But with this, they're doing a lot of background on what went on. And even though, like you said, they don't spend too much time on the characters in the beginning because they kill them all off, or obviously most of them, not all of them. Yeah. It's one of those
Coach
things.
Bombay.
Yeah, it's one of those things where by the time we get to that big action scene at the end, you're like, okay, everything was literally building up to this moment, and we get that nice ending with that scene, and you're like, okay, this makes complete sense to have this action scene here, because they did such a great job just working their way towards that. There was never really action for the sake of having action. They knew when to slow it down. The heist wasn't going to be full of them fighting a ton of people, because they would have just, had all of the alarms going off. That would have been pointless.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. Like all the action sequences feel natural the way that they get to them. And even when we get to the train, I took notes on this as I was watching, because every single plot line that that was building throughout the movie and the characters were introduced to, everything's coming to a head on the train. You have Luther versus Max,
right,
where he's trying to block her modem, and that's some of the technology definitely makes the movie show its age.
Yeah, I made that note. I was like, the tech does not age well, but everything else pretty much does. But at the same time, it's kind of fun to see that tech again, because you're like, oh my goodness, floppy disks.
Oh yeah, the entire MacGuffin of the movie is based on a floppy disk. Like it's amazing. And so we have Luther versus Max. You have Barnes and Kittredge are searching the train, which we end up finding out that Ethan has given them a heads up about Jim. Ethan has his final test for Claire because when he was sitting with Jim at the table, I think in the train station, and he's going through his head, thinking, how did all this work? And then when he first pictures Claire, he's like, no, she couldn't have done it. But I feel like he has the final test for her there, and then learns that she betrayed him as well. Then obviously you have Phelps versus Ethan. And so it's like you got all these things intertwining all within the train, and then everything goes up on top of the train, and it's awesome. I love it. And the music is fantastic. I always forget that this is Danny Elfman, because I'm so used to when I hear a Danny Elfman score that it sounds like Danny Elfman, and I feel like you hear bits of this in it, but I feel like this is also kind of still him stretching his originality a bit more. I feel like sometimes he relies a bit on the things he learned doing like the Batman movies and stuff. But he did a nice job on the Avengers movies too. But this is probably one of my favorite Danny Elfman scores.
I did make note of that as well. I was like, this is very espionage-like. I really enjoy it because we're so used to associating him more so with like the Tim Burton style of movies and everything like that. So to know that this was Danny Elfman, at first I was like, that's an interesting choice. But as the movie went on, I was like, it actually works. But now that we've gone through the action sequences, I feel like it makes sense to talk about Tom Cruise as an action star. He's been doing this for, decades now, like you said. So to be, what is he? He's like 56 now. He's still doing these crazy action sequences and everything like that. And obviously, he was only 30 something when he did this one, but you kind of can't help but wonder if he's sort of one of the best action stars of our time right now.
I 100% think that he is. He's definitely the last of the true action stars and true like movie stars of that. I don't want to say bygone era because that makes it sound way too old, but it really is like you don't see anyone stepping up and doing the things that he does for entertainment. Like he just not a bit of what he puts into these movies is anything less than like 150%, and it's absolute insanity. And I've been seeing a lot of articles actually speaking to the fact that he is like the greatest action star of our time, because it's just he's unmatched in what he does. I mean, the man went and did a halo jump for this movie. Jumped across a building and broke his leg, but still finishes the shot because that's the job. That's what he's got to do. And that shot of him getting up and walking after breaking his leg is in the movie because that's the only shot they have. And so he knew that. Like it's insane. And my friend and I were joking because he's like, Tom Cruise is absolutely insane. Like all the things he's doing. He's like, he's got to have a death wish. I don't understand why he's doing this. And I was like, yeah, it's crazy. I somewhat understand it. Not that long ago, I rappelled down a 17-story building for charity. And the second I hit the ground, I not only wanted to go again, but I wanted to find a taller building to do it on. Now, I'm not saying I'm ever going to reach what Tom Cruise is doing, but I get the mentality of just like, that was so much fun. I want to do it again and do it bigger. It's remarkable. I never get tired of his running and the stunts. And even just his genuine charm in this character especially. I love it.
With Fallout, I did notice that discussion happening a bit more about, the best action star of our time and everything like that. And, the usual suspects were thrown in there too. Keanu Reeves does a lot of his own stunts for John Wick, apparently. I don't really keep up too much on who does their own stunts and everything like that in Hollywood, but apparently he does his. And then, Bruce Willis obviously has a ton of action movies under his belt with Die Hard and everything like that. So I guess that brings me to another big question here. Is this the best action movie franchise that is still ongoing? Because, I don't think I would necessarily count Marvel movies in this, even though they do have action sequences, obviously, but the superhero genre is just a whole monster of its own, in my opinion, even if the movies themselves sort of have different genres that they take on. And I feel like, with Mission Impossible having 6 movies now over the course of 22 years, you mentioned they had some trouble with production and everything like that. That is a very long time to keep a movie franchise going because, if you take a look at the Fast and the Furious movies, they've obviously come out at a much faster rate. That doesn't necessarily mean they're better, one's better or worse, but we have more of those movies now already than we have of Mission Impossible movies. So it's just interesting to look at which action movie franchises are able to keep going and keep sustaining themselves. And I think it's really impressive that despite all of its trouble, Mission Impossible is still happening.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I agree. Like the superhero stuff is kind of like in another category. I think even if you do look at them as, oh yeah, they have like action and everything, I think this one does surpass it simply because of the practical stunts that they put into it. I mean, the superhero movies have a lot more CGI. That's not a detriment to them because obviously they deal with, magic and powers and everything. And so you can only do so much practical. And I think they do a decent amount practical and then they add in more CGI. But the Mission Impossible series, so you had this movie that this first movie went through a lot of trouble coming together. And it's remarkable how much it works because they were still working through the script and writing the script and changing the script while they were filming, which seems to be kind of a pretty usual thing these days. But back then, I don't think they were necessarily as open to taking such risks. I mean, certainly there were probably examples of it. But one of the things with the series when it started out is you had this one made by Brian De Palma, and then the next film in the series brings in John Woo and is a very, very different style action movie. And it very much, it pushes the action even further. The story and the emotional aspect of it is pushed into melodrama territory. It's garnered as the weakest of the series, but most people, even when they say it's the weakest of the series, they say it's still so much fun to watch because of just how ridiculous it is. So you have that, and then I forget how many years were in between 2 and then 3, but 3 came out, and that brought in J.J. Abrams, who then takes his own style and puts it into the movie and added a bit more of a personal side into Ethan's story and brought in a fantastic, almost Bondian villain with Philip Seymour Hoffman. And then you get to Ghost Protocol, which the Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout are really the best examples of what the series was kind of on track to become, and kind of took all the different aspects of the first 3, and those main aspects now exist in Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout. And it really is incredible that it's kind of universally agreed upon by fans of the series that it's a series that, well, there was the dip with 2, but really continues for the most part to just get better and better and better. And for all these years and the troubles of getting it together, and now the movies have been like Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout kind of came out pretty close to each other, because it's like, all right, this is what we want to be, this is what we want to do, and fans are excited about how much better they keep getting. And so I would say I don't think there's a better action series out there right now that has lasted as long as this one. And I'm a huge, huge James Bond fan. But I would even say that Mission Impossible is out James Bonding James Bond right now in its current movies. And I'm a huge fan of Daniel Craig's stuff. I think they're fantastic. Those have even fluctuated kind of in levels of quality, but Mission Impossible seems to have just found the right rhythm of the action, the drama, the intensity, and the humor. And it just works. And I don't know where the series is going to go from here, but I know I'm in, and I think a lot of people are, because the reviews continue to just be, the reviews and reaction for the new one just continue to be incredible.
Right, and that gap between 2 and 3 was from 2000 to 2006. They both happened to come out in May,
Oh, wow.
so that's a very big gap. And you still had 4 years in between the first and second one too. So it's like it took a while to get to Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and admittedly I have not seen all of these movies, so I can't really speak to them as a franchise as a whole, but they are entertaining from what I have seen. I know since we have the third movie sitting on the shelf, I have probably seen it, but it was so long ago that I probably don't remember most of it, because, like I said, 2006 was when the third one came out. So that was 12 years ago. I don't even know what I was doing 12 years ago, let alone like what movies I watched.
Yeah, I tried in my descriptions to keep it nice and vague, because I was like, I don't think she's seen them, so I don't want to like spoil anything. The nice part about especially like the first one, the second one, and the third one, you can kind of watch, and then even Ghost Protocol, you can jump into any of those without having seen any of the others, and absolutely still enjoy yourself. Rogue Nation, even I would say for the most part, you can, and Fallout is much more a direct sequel to Rogue Nation, and introduces some other aspects from previous movies, especially 3 and 1. But I will say Fallout even in its own right does a really nice job of, it answers all the questions that you need to enjoy it on its own. And then if you have seen all the other ones, you kind of get a little bit more of that extra fun of, oh my God, that's that thing. You know, kind of like in the Marvel movies, that it's, if you pick up on the Easter eggs, you get that little bit of bonus fun. But if you don't pick up on the Easter eggs, you're not losing anything from the story necessarily either, for the most part.
Yeah, I certainly do plan to watch the rest of them. And, you know, Movie Pass is having some issues right now, so I won't be seeing Fallout anytime soon. But that's like a whole different podcast or something, so we won't dive too deep into that. But like I said, we have 3 sitting on the shelf, so I'll probably see if, I think 2 was also streaming on Stars, so I will be checking that out in the next few days, since I have a free trial for the next few days, I believe. I probably should keep an eye on that, not forget to cancel it.
Oh, I do that every time. And then I'm like, well, you know, it already paid, so I might as well watch some more movies. Yeah, I mean, 2's a lot of fun. You really just turn your brain off and just enjoy the absolute insanity that it is. It's super over dramatic and really pushes the cheese of the series, but the action is insane and incredible. So it's that one, I still think it's a ton of fun, even if it's not my favorite of the series. But I love every single one of these. I just did my series rewatch prior to going to see Fallout, and then I had no problem sitting and watching the first one again to do the podcast, because I was like, you know what, I probably could sit down and do the podcast without watching it again, but I'm gonna watch it again. my roommates came home and they're like, seriously, you're watching Mission Impossible again? I'm like, shut up, leave me alone.
I think what this first one did was just really give you a good foundation for who Ethan Hunt is too. And I'm glad that you brought up the James Bond movies, because that's another series that I have not really watched, I'm ashamed to say. I plan on fixing that at some point. I just have to figure out where I can watch them, because there's so many, and there have been so many different people to play James Bond, that I feel like it's kind of hard to compare a legacy series like that, because you're like, okay, but then, you know, which Bond are we talking about, and which era, and this and that. But with Mission Impossible, you have Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt the whole time. And, you know, obviously not the case for the TV show, which I wasn't even aware there was a TV show, if I'm being honest. Like, that's how uninformed I am about Mission Impossible, I guess, right now. So, you know, to have the film series be able to keep its lead this entire time, because I think even with things like the Bourne movies, there was like one Bourne movie or something that didn't have Matt Damon in it, and I was just like, but why?
There's actually a really funny factoid with the Bourne movies and the Mission Impossible movies. So Jeremy Renner is poor Hawkeye. He tends to get shafted in the Avengers movies, and he was cast to step in as a new character in the Bourne series for the Bourne Legacy, and it did. I guess the plan was to do the Bourne Legacy and then another movie with Matt Damon, which they did, and I think the plan was they wanted to do like a movie follow-up that had both of them in it. From the returns of both of those, I don't think that's going to happen. And then the extra kick in the nuts for Jeremy Renner is that he was brought in initially for Ghost Protocol to kind of take over for Tom Cruise, kind of passing of the torch. The script was reworked and it doesn't play out that way. He makes a really good addition to the team, and I really like him in both Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation. But then there's something about there were scheduling issues in when, like, whether or not he was going to be Infinity War, and then when this movie was going to start filming, and so they weren't sure, and so he's not in Fallout, and I'm just like, Jeremy Renner, I feel like he just can't get a break. I mean, I guess he had that movie Tag that I hear is actually a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Even though he broke both his arms while filming that, and then his arms were CGI'd, which is kind of hilarious.
I did hear about that. Yeah.
But so that's a fun thing. As far as the Bond movies, anytime you want to dive into any Bond movies for the podcast, let me know. But also, if you just want some advice on kind of where to kind of start, because it is an overwhelming amount of movies. It's with a 50-year history. I'd be happy to help with some advice on that. The cool thing about the Bond series is they do change the leads, and the style changes from era to era. So it's almost like a time capsule series in that way. And everyone has their favorite James Bond. So it's like there are those who love Roger Moore, and there's those who love Timothy Dalton, Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig, and then George Lazenby had one movie. But even his movie is kind of having almost like an extra cult following to it, even though it was kind of like looked down upon at first. So that's the fun part about how that series panned out. So who knows? I think, who knows with Mission Impossible? I think Tom Cruise was asked recently, I watched, how would he feel if he reaches the point that he doesn't, want to climb on the edge of planes and stuff? How does he feel about someone taking over for the Mission Impossible series? And he said he was absolutely for it. He's like, he always wants to see these movies to kind of move in a great creative place. He said the one thing that he doesn't want is for someone to come in and feel that because of all the insane stunts that he does, that whoever comes in and replaces him, that they need to do those things. That he's like, I would never push anyone to do those things. He's like, right. I do them. I love them. I don't know what the Mission Impossible series would be like without Ethan Hunt and without Tom Cruise.
It's weird to think about, for sure.
Yeah. I've been seeing a number of articles lately of like, where does the series go from here? And it will be interesting to see, but I think we still got Tom Cruise for a bit more. I don't think he's slowing down at least anytime soon.
Yeah, before we wrap up with some final thoughts here, I do want to briefly give a shout out to the other cast members, though, because you have Ving Rhames, who is apparently the only other character or the only other actor credited for all of the movies. So he plays Luther, and you mentioned he's kind of the computer whiz and everything like that. Even though the tech wasn't super advanced, he had more advanced tech than everyone else. And then you have John Voight as Jim Phelps, and those are probably the two biggest names, I would say, aside from Tom Cruise, because personally I didn't know some of the foreign actors in this. Like, I will probably butcher her name, but the actress who plays Claire, Emmanuelle Beert, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I
guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, I looked at her IMDb page and I was like, I don't recognize her from literally anything else. And then, Henry Czerny happens to be in Sharp Objects right now. And It was kind of weird seeing a younger version of him because I hadn't really been familiar with him before Sharp Objects. But, I was listening to The Watch, I believe, which is the Ringers podcast with Chris Ryan and Andy Greenwald, and they just go in depth on TV and film and everything.
Oh, the rewatchables?
No, this one's just The Watch.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I just got obsessed with the Ringers, the rewatchables, because they did a Mission Impossible episode. A friend sent it to me.
Yeah, they have so many, it's very hard to keep track.
Emilio Estevez, I always like to give a shout out to him, Mr. Gordon Bombay himself, who is absolutely fantastic in, and I feel like leaves such an imprint on the movie, even though he's the first person to be killed off within the first 20 minutes in a incredibly gruesome way.
Right.
But it's there. Something that I think is fantastic about this movie, especially, is the ensemble. And in 2 and 3, the ensemble's kind of there, but it is more of like a Tom Cruise vehicle. But in the new ones, I'm really excited that it does. If you enjoy like the team aspect of this one, you'll really enjoy that they get back to the team aspect in 4, 5, and 6. And Luther especially, he's terrific, and you really get. There's the one scene when Ethan doesn't trust Krieger with the knockless, so he does the little like magic trick, and then Krieger gets pissed off and leaves. And then Ethan says to him, he's like, I want you to hold on to this. And that moment and that conversation, and when Luther looks at Ethan and says to him, he's like, I won't let this get out in the open. That to me is the precise moment that their friendship and working relationship, where they would just kind of, that they'll die for each other to get the mission done. That right there, I feel, is solidified for the rest of the series in that moment. And Luther's just awesome. He's hilarious. He's a badass, and I love that he's this big, like, jacked guy, and he's the computer guy. I love that it's like flipped. You'd expect him to kind of be the muscle, but he's the computer guy.
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting role for him, and I'm glad that they didn't go with that sort of stereotype, like, oh, he's this big guy, he's going to be the muscle. And I really enjoyed him in that role too. So it's great to see that he sticks with the series for all 6 of the movies as well. But do you have any final thoughts? I know we covered quite a bit here between, the action sequences and talking about how there's story in between and everything. But is there anything you feel like we've missed?
The only other actress I do want to give a huge shout out to is the one who plays Max.
Okay.
I'm looking her up real quick. Vanessa Redgrave.
Yeah.
Her and Ethan's banter together is just so on point and just really fantastic. I love those scenes. And then beyond that, just the one thing that I really recognized with this movie in rewatching it this time is that, as we talked about, how it feels like it's aged really well, that it doesn't feel super dated, even with the technology. I feel like the way the style of the movie is done, it's ultra stylized. And it's a movie that obviously it takes place in the 90s, but it kind of has this feeling of it could fit in any era. It reminds me of like how Batman the Animated Series does things, where it's like, yeah, they have like portable phones and stuff, but then like they're using Tommy guns. The cars look old. The dress is kind of a classic look. When you have Kittredge and Barnes walking around, they have that really kind of 1940s look to them. And I think that mixed with the practical effects and the very limited CGI and the music and just the performances, I think really makes this film hold up in a very timeless way, rather than kind of a bottle of one specific era. And I just think that's really, really cool. Also, the fact that if you watch the opening credits when the theme song's going, you can basically watch the entire movie. It includes scenes throughout the entire movie, and that was something that was pulled from the TV show. Every episode included scenes for the episode you were about to watch, which is kind of unique and cool. I don't know. I could go on and say a ton of things about this, and I'm sure I'll think of more, but I love this series. I can't wait for more. And I thank you for doing this one with me, because I really wanted to talk about Mission Impossible.
Of course. And I will definitely go through and watch the rest of these. And if you want to come back on for the other 5 movies, hopefully, we would be able 100%. To get them. Hopefully we would be able to get them done before another one comes out. It seems like we have time at their schedule pacing.
Oh man, I would love to come back for all the movies, especially to discuss with someone who's just seeing most of them for the same time for the first time. So yeah, I'm in. You let me know.
Will do. I might have to go watch the second one shortly after this, so I'll definitely keep you updated. And thank you so much, Tim, for coming on. It's definitely fun to talk with people who just enjoy things so much, and that's kind of my goal with this podcast. It's like, let's talk about things we like, and if we want to talk more critically about something that we don't like, that's fine too. But I think for the most part, people would rather listen to, I guess, non-critics like ourselves talk about things we like, instead of just hating on something that maybe isn't as good. And like you said, there's ups and downs with this series, so I'm sure as I have you back on for more of these, we'll talk about that the more we dive into it. But like I said, thank you for coming on to talk about this. And to our listeners, as always, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.